Raghu Bala, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Nice. Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. You're joining us from India, where you're traveling for business, normally headquartered in California. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about how blockchain is improving data availability, security, and flexibility, and all those implications for organizational leaders as we're thinking about how to effectively run our businesses. As we get started, I wanted to share Raghu's bio with everybody. Raghu Bala is Chief Technology Officer at Croesus Labs and was previously an executive with Yahoo, InfoSpace, PwC, and with 3 successful startup exits. He also teaches at the MIT Sloan School of Business and Computer Science and AI Laboratories course on the implications of artificial intelligence on business, as well as he is a tutor for MIT's blockchain course. He was winner of the 2016 Best Abstract and Best Wearable Medical Device category at the AI in Medicine Conference. And in 1993, he was winner of the Best Thesis Award on Temporal Databases at the Hartford Graduate Center Conference. He holds an MBA in Finance from Wharton, I'll say that again. He holds an MBA in Finance from Wharton MBA, an MS in Computer Science from RPI, has been a Columbia University adjunct lecturer, published author, and speaker at several major conferences, including IoT Congress, Google I/O, and more. It's a real pleasure to have you. What a tremendous background. Anything else you would like to share with me or my audience by way of your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, this year I've been quite active in the publishing space as well as a contributing editor to a new book that's on the market called Step into the Metaverse, and also another book that's about to hit the market now called Handbook on Blockchain, where I wrote a chapter on asset tokenization, and some of that might be relevant for today's conversation.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. And again, tremendous expertise and background. It's a pleasure to have you. And why don't we just dive on in? And if you can provide a little bit of an explanation of blockchain. It's a term that gets used a lot. I think
Sure.
most people are somewhat familiar with it, but I think as I talk to people, I think most aren't fully grasping the true context of blockchain. So let's start there, and then we can start to talk about how, what the implications are for businesses.
Sure. So basically, the key concept to understand is a term called distributed ledger. So and blockchain is it's a type of distributed ledger, and I'll get into these terms a little bit going forward. So basically, if you look at technology infrastructures companies have been using databases to store information for a very long time, almost 50 years currently. There have been different types of technology architectures. Started off with mainframe, then went to client-server computing, and then we went into web computing, where you expose information through web services. And then we sort of took that to the next level using cloud computing, where you rent cloud infrastructure as opposed to having on-premise hardware of your own, and then and so on. And then the next sort of iteration of all of this is blockchain technology. And how does that evolution happen? And let me just state this in the following way. So currently what happens is many businesses tend to hold on to data, and they have internal data sources which they expose to customers and partners via APIs and things like that. But then in the context of distributed ledgers, what happens is um, we look at companies operating in sort of ecosystems. So for example, if there's a supply chain ecosystem, and let's say a car manufacturer has got its own coterie of suppliers, they're all sharing information with one another. Instead of each entity having all the information sort of internal to their own enterprise, they could use blockchain to kind of share information in a common structure. Think of it that way. And so and a lot of times when you read any sort of blockchain sort of literature, you'll see this word centralization versus decentralization. So centralization is when I hold all my data and then I expose it to you via web services or some other means. Whereas in decentralization, the data is sort of outside my organization in sort of these nodes, and I belong to that node. So let's say a car manufacturer will be hold a node, but all of their suppliers will also be in the sort of a network, and they're all sharing information in a sort of a decentralized manner, and they sort of co-own the data as opposed to one entity holding the data and owning it. And why is this relevant? Because another good example would be in an area that we're all familiar with, and there's a lot of backlash that has gone on with the big technology companies. So if you look at how much data is being held by Facebook or Google or Apple or Amazon, they hold enormous market power because they have the data of all the consumers, and that data has benefited them. And the sort of like a business model has been, you give me your data and I'll give you free services. I'll let you use WhatsApp for free. I'll let you use Facebook for free. I'll let you use Google search for free. But I will monetize your data because that's how I'm going to pay for these services. That's how I'm going to maintain my staff and systems and so on to help you. That's been the sort of de facto business model. Now, what's happening is there's a sort of a Web3, which is a big which is a kind of an umbrella word around blockchain and other decentralized systems. Think of it as such. It's almost like not a technology but a movement where people are saying, you know what, I want to own my own data, and I will decide whether you can have it or not. So it's like flipping the model completely on its head, and that's so enterprises are now beginning to come to a realization that the data that they thought that was free, that consumers would just give away, now they are saying, no, I'm going to hold on to my data, and if you want it, I'm willing to let you have it, but there might be a cost. Now you may need to pay me for the data, or it's like there's a different model that will evolve, and so that we are in that whole process is sort of playing out in front of us at this point in time. But blockchain happens to be one of those core technologies that enables that to happen. So with that, I'll just pause because we can keep on talking about this, but I'll pause and then I'll explain further as we go along.
So maybe help clarify for me, you talked about decentralized data. How does that relate to, or is it the same thing as decentralized exchanges that are utilized?
Okay, so first of all, let me begin with the word distributed ledger. So when data is held by in a kind of a decentralized form, it like, for example, if Google is holding your data, you can think of it as a centralized ledger. When the data is sort of shared in an ecosystem, that's a decentralized, it's in a decentralized form, that's a distributed ledger. So in a distributed ledger, there are different types of technologies that can implement distributed ledger, and blockchain is one of them. An analogy would be like if I tell you aircraft, a jet plane is an aircraft, a helicopter is an aircraft, a propeller plane is an aircraft. So blockchain is one type of aircraft. Think of it like that, one type of distributed ledger. So blockchain is, and then there are other types as well out there. But I don't want to get too much into the weeds on that. Okay, but okay. Now, having said that, how do these blockchains hold data? And so blockchain is actually three things. It's a combination of data, logic, and network. So a blockchain network consists of many nodes, and these nodes can be operated by different entities. That means one entity is not controlling all of the data. That it's like it's shared data among multiple entities. So that's a big departure from how data is held by organizations today. Okay, now what is the primary use case of blockchain? There are many use cases. There are use cases in banking, finance, cryptocurrency, healthcare, art, supply chain, on and on and on. There are hundreds of use cases. The first sort of killer app, just like in web, the killer app was in the World Wide Web or in the Internet 1.0, Web 1.0. The killer app was email. So think of cryptocurrency as currently the killer app of Web 3. Basically, you're changing money, and so money was first there was barter, and then there was coins, and then there was paper money, and then there was credit card, and then now you got digital sort of money, which is cryptocurrency. So the money is almost like the first killer app of Web3. Okay, now you asked what's the difference between a decentralized exchange and distributed ledger, or the word decentralized here. So what happens is, when in the cryptocurrency use case specifically, when people have to convert their money from one form to another, they can go to exchange. These exchanges can be centralized or decentralized. So there are centralized exchanges like Coinbase, which is very popular in the US. There's FTX, there is a Kraken, there are many, Binance and so on. These are all exchanges, and most of them are centralized exchanges. That means one company owns that exchange, and it's playing the role of if you go to the airport, you can switch from US dollar to Mexican pesos or something like that. It's like a TravelX. They are like the equivalent of TravelX in the cryptocurrency world. You can convert from Bitcoin to Ethereum, Ethereum to Solana, Solana to Algorand, like that. So they play that exchange function. Now, when an entity is not behind that exchange, it becomes a decentralized autonomous organization. It's also known as a DAO. That means, if you think about it, a robot is controlling that entity. And for those who are not familiar with it, they'll think like, what the heck are you talking about? But it's not controlled by any one person. It's the governance of that organization is done by a smart contract, and it figures out how do I operate this organization. In the case of an exchange, it will do the currency swaps for you. And the first state in the US which has approved the decentralized autonomous organizations is Wyoming. In fact, you can go and register your own decentralized organization. It looks like an LLC. And but then once you put a smart contract in place, the smart contract sort of runs the company for you instead of you running the company. So anyway, so decentralized exchanges are simply currency swapping entities that are not controlled by a single organization, but is actually controlled by a smart contract. So.
All right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so as you're describing this, and as I hear, other pundits and thought leaders in the blockchain, and technology space discussing the implications, there's a lot of conversation around data availability, security, and flexibility. So maybe describe a bit more specifically now exactly how this is important for companies and how blockchain is improving the data availability, security, and flexibility within companies.
Sure. So actually, there are two types of blockchains, if you want to think of it. First are public chains, and second is permission chains. So public chains are like your public toll roads. That means anyone can drive on the toll road as long as they pay the toll, and which is known as gas in the blockchain parlance. It's known as a gas fees and so on. So that's your toll that you pay to participate in transactions on this toll road. The other one is a permission chain, where you and a set of members form a consortium, and it's like a private road in a gated community. Only people within that community can drive in those roads, and nobody else can come in, let's say. So it's like on an invite-only basis, and you have your own consortium of companies that can share information. So both these are there. At a broad sense, there are two types of chains. Now, in terms of privacy and security and so on, So blockchains by themselves, when they store data, it has got many properties, and one of the key attributes is uh, something called immutability. So one of the great things about blockchain is you cannot just fudge the numbers. And if you have seen, there have been many accounting scandals of public companies and others. Many scandals over the years. You read them every now and then, and it's because someone cooked the books and fudged the numbers and modified things, because the data is not really transparent. It's hidden, and someone changed some things or dated some things, and there's no oversight or something like that. So with blockchain, one of the good things is um, it's immutable, in the sense that you cannot just willy-nilly modify any data that you want. Others can validate and verify that data, and people can see your changes, so you cannot just fudge it. So that's one of the great aspects of immutability that people like about blockchain. And so in use cases, and by the way, I just want to be very clear, blockchain is not for every use case. There are the current technology stack that we have, Web 2 or whatnot, whether you want to call it that, will still survive. To this day, we still have mainframe computers. Every stage of computing has got its value somewhere, and it persists over a period of time. So not all of Web 2 will be replaced by Web 3, but then there are use cases where blockchain makes complete sense. And so those use cases are ones that will survive. People are trying to use it for some use cases where I sometimes, sort of like roll my eyes, like, this is not one of those cases where it makes sense, for instance. But in many areas, it does make sense. I'll give you one quick use case, like in the case of product provenance or a title. So, for example, um, many people know that your home or your car, the title is established. Like the county where you live in will say that John owns this home or something like that, or John owns this car. The DMV will have a record. But then for certain types of assets, like let's say you have some expensive piece of art, or you own some jewelry, there's no title. Even though it's valuable, there's no title. So that type of lack of title actually has got implications. You cannot really um, borrow against that asset very easily, or you cannot insure that asset very easily. You don't know how many hands it has crossed ownership. It's like first hand, second hand, third hand, and so on. You don't know. So what happens is, what's beginning to happen is many people are starting to establish title on blockchain, and then that brings about liquidity, that brings about the ability to insure these assets, and so on and so forth. So those are like use cases that are really valuable, because it adds value to what's it's currently missing in the market. So those are types of things that I tend to focus on, because I think it makes a difference. And many things, the current system ain't broken, so why fix it, right? So you
Yeah.
can go with what you have. So
Yeah. I think the transparency piece is just really important. And organizations have been moving towards more and more transparency for a long time, in part just driven by available information on the internet. And so leaders and organizations are being held more to account for what they're doing in their organizations, and employees are expecting more of their employers as well. So this need for greater levels of transparency is important. But like you said, there's still ways to kind of cook the books, to kind of spin the numbers, to edit things, and to make things kind of look more favorably, to support the kind of narrative you're going for from a PR standpoint. And so blockchain just really helps to ensure that transparency, that consistency, that accountability for organizations,
exactly.
for leaders. And I think that in and of itself is huge and important. Some of the other types of use cases I've heard a lot, especially because I'm in the education and training and development and learning development space, blockchain being used, more and more at universities in terms of credentialing. So you have degrees that are received, or if you're doing micro credentialing, stackable certificates and credentials, those sorts of things, leveraging
Yes.
blockchain. for verified accomplishments of individuals as they're in the L&D space. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of others. Does that make sense to you as a use case for
Yes,
blockchain?
absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll give you, like, for instance, I mean, some are very unfortunate use cases, but in the I'll give you one in the US and one overseas. So in the US, if you remember, about 10 years ago, for-profit universities were very big. And unfortunately, a lot of people enrolled in them, and many of them have gone out of business. So let's imagine that you got a certificate from one of those colleges. Now, you paid good money, you went for classes, you passed. But then if someone wanted to verify that you actually got a degree from that institution, they call up the number, you know, they can't verify it. But then if it was on a chain, now it can still be verified regardless of whether the institution still survived or has been merged into something else, or whatnot, or disappeared, or whatever it is. It's still, you can still, your degree is still valid, your credentials are still valid. So that's one use case in the US. But another unfortunate use case, actually, MIT, where I teach their courses and so on, they actually participated in the Syrian crisis when there was, Syria has been bombed heavily. A lot of the universities are sort of not functioning anymore, and a lot of refugees moved. Like, people who were doctors or lawyers or professionals, became cab drivers in parts of Europe, and they couldn't prove their certifications. So in those types of use cases, it also makes a lot of sense where you can say, this person has got this much of qualifications and so on. And so that when they go across boundaries, and they can prove their credentials. So these use cases actually are very useful, and sometimes we don't see the value of it until some disaster strikes. And both cases that I gave you examples of, bad things happening, but blockchain, a distributed ledger, which is out there, and a public ledger, is very useful, actually. So
Yeah, excellent. Well, Raghu, this has just been a really great conversation and a good introduction for myself and hopefully for my audience around blockchain and how companies can utilize blockchain, appropriate use cases, how the decentralized exchange works, et cetera. I think all that's really important to understand as we move into the future. Before we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
So you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm quite active. I post articles or comment on various things, and that's the easiest way to reach me. And then, as far as what I'm focusing on currently in Web3, I'm participating in the development of the next generation crypto wallet currently. And also, I've been working on some things relating to the metaverse, which is a pretty interesting use case for decentralization, and has got blockchain as one of its underlying substrates. So those are areas, I think, which you'll see in the next 5 years, sort of like unfold into something very interesting. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Raghu. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage my audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Raghu and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day.